But you're telling me that these kids get taken on sort of the list, the criteria for taking kids out of their home in an Aboriginal family is different than in a non-Aboriginal family, essentially.
Exactly, and so that gets back to Dr. McDonald's point, where you have to kind of tailor your interventions to what is actually putting the kids at risk in the first place. For other populations of children who face more physical abuse, then you need to tackle that. But for Aboriginal children, what we know from the Canadian Incident Study is on child abuse is that it's neglect, and so we need to tackle that. And not neglect in terms of I have the parenting skills and choose not to deal with it. It's neglect driven by factors that would put any family at risk. So we put any family into a situation where there's poverty, poor housing, and this trauma from residential schools. They would be struggling.
Fiona McDonald finds a parallel between the system that we have now with so many First Nations children in care and the residential school system. Do you see that?
I see it in terms of the outcomes. So what we have here is we have, as you pointed out, three times the number of First Nations kids in child welfare than we did at the height of residential school. And we also see it in terms of the pattern of the federal government's response. I mean, back in 1904, remember, the Auditor General of Canada came out with a commentary on residential schools and said the federal government is tragically underfunding those schools. And that's resulting in the deaths in some cases and the poor outcomes for Aboriginal children in the schools.
Now, in Manitoba... go ahead.
And we have the same pattern of underfunding today. And again, the federal government isn't doing anything about it.
You said in 1904. Did you misspeak?
1904. There was the Auditor General of Canada did
106 years ago.
106 years ago, and that same pattern is replicating today. And you know what's so scary for me is when I was sitting in that tribunal room, in both cases, the Government of Canada knew as of 1907 with Dr. Bryce's work about the deaths of the children in residential school, which were preventable from tuberculosis. Dr. Bryce said, you know, that's the famous saying, we know just what to do to prevent these deaths. And it's today we have all these kids in foster care. We have good research that tells us what we need to target, and we simply need equitable resources to do it. And instead of providing it, the federal government is replicating that same bad pattern of just ignoring the problem, or in this case, fighting against giving those resources that are so desperately needed by these kids.
Now, in Manitoba, the Child and Youth Advocate has described their system as being in a state of chaos. 85% of children in care in Manitoba are Aboriginal, according to the Child and Youth Advocate. This is a province that has shifted and been shifting control of Aboriginal children to Aboriginal-run child welfare agencies. What does that tell you?
Well, one of the things it tells me is that underfunding is really at play. What you need to remember is that the still on reserve in Manitoba, those children receive far less funding than children off reserve. And because of the devolution, you actually can end up with the same agency servicing children off reserve and on reserve. And the on-reserve children get less funding to keep them safely in their family homes. And we know from administrative data from Manitoba that First Nations kids on reserve go into child welfare care at higher rates than children off reserve. So we're already seeing that.
Okay, so where would the funding go to keep them in their homes? What kinds of things would it pay for?
It would pay for things like family counseling, parenting programs, helping people with family addictions issues, because right now what happens is if you're lucky, you can get sent to a treatment center if you're the person with the addictions, but there's no treatment for the family. And that is really critical in order for there to be a real turnaround around addictions issues. Those are the kinds of things that we could provide that would make a real difference for these kids and keep them safely in their family homes, or if they're in care, get them back sooner. And we've got a few programs across the country that have been able to get adequate funding through pilot programs, et cetera, that have demonstrated that this can work. So we've already had success. The problem is that there's no consistency in the funding and no adequacy in the funding to make that a universal expectation of all First Nations children across the country.
So to what extent do you think the Truth and Reconciliation process will make a difference to the next generation?
Well, I think it really, to me, reconciliation means not saying sorry twice. And what's really important to me is not only that we hear these stories, but I'm very interested, because of the tribunal process, about what the Government of Canada has actually learned. How is it treating this generation of First Nations children any differently? I mean, I was shocked at the tribunal on June 3rd when Canada's Council suggested that, even if there are inequities, of course the Auditor General says that there are, and even if these inequities result in kids going into foster care, well, we, the federal government, could be looked at as being the good guys because at least we're providing something, and the provinces aren't providing anything on reserve. And I'm just thinking, what are they thinking? Like, these are little vulnerable kids, and they have a responsibility to provide at least an equitable opportunity for these kids to get a good shot in life. All they're doing is getting themselves off the hook with it.
Cindy Blackstock, thank you very much for your thoughts.
Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon.
That is Cindy Blackstock. She's the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada. Now, we did request an interview with Indian and Northern Development Minister Chuck Strahl. He declined. If you have thoughts on this story or anything else you're hearing on The Current today, call us or write to us. Go to our website, cbc.ca/thecurrent, and then click on the Contact Us link. You can also call us toll-free at 1-877-287-7366. And if you go to our website, cbc.ca/thecurrent,